going to get started. There's what I want you to be working on right now as I'm talking is I want you to solve these first three problems. I'm going to give you a few hints. The first two, what are you going to do first? Factor. Good job. We're going to factor. Okay. The third one, you need to FOIL. You need to set equal to 0. Then you need to factor. Okay? So that's what you're working on right now as I'm talking. I have jury duty on Monday. I have no idea what next week is going to look like. You definitely do not have class on Monday. But for next week, you need to check your email daily to get announcements from me. Okay? I'm probably going to go ahead and do some video problems that you'll have on Monday, but you will have a classwork assignment, so you don't have to come to class on Monday, but you do have class on Monday. You've got a classwork assignment that you're going to work on. You're going to practice these problems. You can work on them with each other.
I won't have to turn it in?
No. I'll post the solutions and everything for you, so you don't have to turn it in. Okay? Now, I hope to be back by Wednesday, but some people say don't count on it. So I don't have any idea what to expect. Your Chapter 6 homework is written down here in red. It's kind of a whole bunch of different numbers. Okay, your tests. I have your tests mostly done. You can pick up your tests today between 11 and 12. You got to give me a few minutes because if you want it, you'll just have to wait for me to finish it, and then I can give it to you. You can email me from your regular email. Okay? That's the one that's like at forum.montevallo.edu, and I can scan it and send it to you so that you can see it. Or you can look on Canvas and get your test back next week. So it's really up to you. You can do any of those three things to get your test back. Okay? I didn't have them quite done this morning. Okay, any questions about jury duty next week, tests, Chapter 5 and 6 homework? Lots of good stuff, right? Okay. So let's start talking about these three problems. Okay, you can actually factor all of these. So the question that I'm asking is, what are we looking for when we solve? What are we looking for when we solve a quadratic? Okay, what are we looking for when we solve a quadratic? And we're solving a quadratic. These are quadratics because they're raised to the second power. We are solving because there's an equal sign. So what are we looking for when we solve quadratics? Any ideas? What are we looking for when we solve quadratics? Okay, what variable is up there that we're solving for? Good. We're solving for x. A quadratic makes a graph. Okay? And I'm going to move this slide and I'm going to show you what this graph looks like. So here's our graph right here. When we are solving quadratics, what we are solving for is where the graph crosses the x-axis. That's what we're solving for. Okay? Where graph crosses the x-axis. Okay, sometimes they are called solutions. They're called zeros. They are x-intercepts. And every once in a while, if it's an old algebra book, you'll hear them called roots. Okay? But that's what we're solving for. So let's look at this one right here. I've got x squared plus 8x plus 12. I can factor that. And I factor that to x plus 6 and x plus 2. X plus 6 and x plus 2. Okay? So that is equal to 0. I set each one of these equal to 0. And my answers to this are x equals negative 6 and x equals negative 2. And if you look, okay, this point right here is negative, where x is negative 6. And this point right here is where x is negative 2. So that is what we are solving for. That is what we are solving for. Now, we have solved these by factoring. That's what we did in chapter 3, and that's what we did when we turned them into when we had rational equations that we had to solve. That's what happened in chapter 4 also. You could graph, like if you wanted to solve these, you could graph them. Okay? Graphing them, you're estimating, and so that is risky anytime you estimate when they're not nice integers. A graph is very, very good because it gives you a great visual. It shows you what you are actually solving for. It gives you a really good visual. Okay? Another way to solve is by factoring. That's what we did in all of chapter 3. So when we solved by factoring, we set the quadratic equal to 0, we factored, and then we set each factor equal to 0. Okay? Today what we're going to talk about is we're going to talk about solving quadratics using completing the square and the quadratic formula. Completing the square or the quadratic formula. You need to be comfortable with one of these, okay? So you must be able to either complete the square or use the quadratic formula, because not all of your quadratics are going to be factorable. So you need to be able to do one or both. Okay? Your test, your quiz, and your final will say solve using the method of your choice. Okay? That's what it'll say. Solve using the method of your choice. So you can factor it, you can complete the square, you could use the quadratic formula, you could graph it if you want to, but I wouldn't recommend graphing it. Okay? Question?
If we have to use it during the test, will you provide us with the
Yes.
quadratic formula?
I will provide you with a quadratic formula. Yes, excellent question. Excellent question. Okay? So we are going to talk about the steps on how to do completing the square and quadratic formula. So we just did this problem. What is the answer to this problem? We just did it. -2 and -6. -2 and -6. Okay? So we're going to do this one by completing the square. Now I'm going to write steps for completing the square. Okay? So the first thing that I'm going to do when I'm completing the square is I'm going to move the constant to the right. Okay, and that's different than we've ever done before. Usually we're setting everything to 0. Okay? But here we are going to move the constant to one side. Okay? Move the constant to one side. The constant is the number that doesn't have an x with it. So our constant here is 12. It's also known as the C value. The C value. Okay? So I am going to subtract 12 from both sides. Okay, so this is step 1, and I'm going to end up with x squared plus 8x equals negative 12. Okay, that's my first step. My second step is to take half the b value and square it. Okay, now ax squared plus bx plus c, that is standard form of a quadratic. Okay, c is our constant, so in this case it was positive 12. B is my number with the x value. Okay, so what is my b value in this particular problem? 8. I want to take half of 8. What is half of 8? 4. Okay, so here's my second step right here. I am going to take 1/2 of 8. Okay, so 1/2 of 8 is 4. 4 squared is 16. Okay, now step number 3 is to add value from step 2 to both sides. Okay, so in step number 2, we got 16. That's half of the b value, and then we squared it. So step 3 is me adding 16 to both sides. Okay, so step 3 is me adding 16 to both sides. Okay, step 4 is to factor and simplify. Now, I'm going to rewrite this. I have x squared plus 8x plus 16. And negative 12 plus 16 is 4. By design, I created a perfect square trinomial. Okay? So, when I factor this, what number multiplied together gives me 16 and added together gives me 8? What two numbers? 4 and 4. So this is going to be x plus 4 and x plus 4. Can I rewrite that as x plus 4 squared? Is that the same thing? Yes. So I have x plus 4 squared is equal to 4. So this right here is step 4. Okay? Now I need to erase my steps 1 through 4. Can I erase those, or are you still writing down? This is the stuff on the right-hand side. Can I erase? Okay. So, step 5. Step 5 is take the square root of both sides. Okay, now, one of the things that students forget is the plus and minus. Now, if I had x squared equals 4, x can be what? What can x be? Not negative 4 and not positive 4. What's the square root of 4? 2. So it can be negative 2 or it can be positive 2. Yeah, You're good. You're good. It's Friday. We're ready. We're ready. So when I take the square root of the side that's got the 4 in it, I have to put a plus or minus right there. Okay? So this actually equals x plus 4 plus or minus 2. Okay? And I got the 2 because that was the square root of 4. Square root of 4 is 2, and I have to have that plus or minus right there. Okay? So don't forget your plus or minus. Now, step 6 is solve for x. Okay? So what am I going to subtract from both sides? Good. So I'm going to subtract 4 from both sides. So I get x is equal to -4 plus or minus 2. Now, sometimes you have to stop there. Okay? Like if that 2 was in a square root sign, I'd have to stop there. But that 2 isn't in a square root sign, so I can keep going. So this is step 7 right here. Step 7 is simplify. So I have x equals -4 plus 2, and I have x equals -4 minus 2. What is -4 plus 2? Good. And -4 minus 2. And is that what we know the answers to be? Yes, we know the answers are that. So this is the process of completing the square. Typically, you do completing the square when you can't factor it. When I do completing the square, I look for a value right here of 1. So in front of the x, I look to see if there's a 1. The other thing that I look at is a b is even. Okay? If you've got an a value of 1 and b is even, that is a great time to do completing the square. If I've got a number in front of x squared, I just go ahead and do the quadratic formula. That's just me. You can do it however you want. But me, if I've got a value in front of the x squared, I use the quadratic formula because completing the square will involve fractions. Okay? So that is how you complete the square. Can I go to the next slide? Is it okay? Okay. Now we are going to talk about how to use the quadratic formula. And it doesn't matter if you factor, completing the square, or the quadratic formula, you are going to get the same thing every single time. Okay? So, here's the quadratic formula. Negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Now the blue, that is stuff that I've got to plug in. Okay, the a, b, and c, I've got to plug that in. Now, we talked very briefly about standard form. So a, x squared plus bx plus c, that is standard form. So I've got to identify my a, b, and c value before I can do anything with the quadratic formula. So my first step is going to put equation in standard form. Okay, put equation in standard form. Okay, is x squared plus 8x plus 12 in standard form? Yes, it is. The second thing that I do is I identify my A, B, and C. Okay, I'm going to identify my A, B, and C. So my A value is what? B value? 8. And my C value? Good. Okay, so this was my first step. This was my second step. Okay, my third step is going to be to plug A, B, and C into quadratic formula. Okay, now, if it's blue, that means it's an A, B, or C value. Okay, so if I'm plugging in something blue, it's an A, B, or C value. Okay, so I'm going to have negative B. If it's purple, it's part of the quadratic formula. Plus or minus the square root of 8 squared minus 4 times A times C. Okay, and that's all over 2A. Okay, now my fourth step, and typically where students make mistakes, is to simplify. Okay, students typically make their mistakes when they're trying to simplify. So you got to follow order of operations, exponent rules. You got to follow all those things. Okay, so I have negative 8 plus or minus the square root. What is 8 squared?
64.
Good. 4 times 1 times 12. Negative 48. Good. Okay. 64 minus 48 is 16. So I've got negative 8 plus or minus the square root of 16 over 2. Very often, you will be done at this point. Very often, you will be done. However, can I simplify the square root of 16? Yes. What is it? 4. So then, I've got negative 8 plus or minus 4 over 2. That is 2 separate, because we've got our plus and we've got our minus. So it's 2 separate answers. So I'm going to have negative 8 plus 4 over 2. What's negative 8 plus 4 over 2? It's negative 2. So negative 8 plus 4 is negative 4. Negative 4 divided by 2 is negative 2. Okay, so I've got negative 2 right there. Then I've got negative 8 minus 4 over 2. What's negative 8 minus 4 over 2? Good. And is that what we know to be the answers? Yes. Because we've got them twice. And we saw a graph. Okay? So you can use either the quadratic formula or completing the square. You can use either of those. But you've got to know how to do one of them. Okay? Are we ready to try some that don't work out nicely? That can't be factored. But we're going to. Okay? Can I go to the next screen? Okay. X squared minus 2x minus 4. I always try to factor. Okay? If I can factor it, it's going to be quicker. So I'm going to look at the product is negative 4. My sum is negative 2. Okay? You've got to remember your product and your sum rules when you're factoring, or else that you're going to mess up. This one cannot be factored. There's no two numbers that multiply together give me negative 4 or added together give me negative 2. There's no two numbers. Okay, so I can't do those. So I am going to complete the square on this one. I'm going to complete the square. The reason that I'm going to complete the square is because this value right here is 1, and this value right here is even. Okay? That is when completing the square is the most straightforward. When my A value is 1 and my B value is even. Okay? A value is 1 and B value even. Okay? That's when you want to do it. So, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to move that -4 to the other side. To do that, I'm going to add 4 to both sides. Okay? I'm adding 4 to both sides. So I'm left with x squared minus 2x equals 4. Okay? So I have moved my constant, or my number without a variable, to the other side. Now, I am going to take 1/2 of -2. What's 1/2 of -2? What's half of -2? It is -1. Okay? So that's -1, and -1 squared is what? What's -1 squared? Positive 1. Okay? So now I am going to add that to both sides. Okay? X squared minus 2x plus 1 equals 5. When I factor this, okay, my two numbers that multiply together give me 1 and add together give me -2 are -1 and -1. That is by design. I wanted a perfect square trinomial. That's what I wanted. Okay? Now I'm going to take the square root of both sides. When I take the square root of 5, what do I have to put in front of it? Good. So I have to put a plus or minus. So I have x minus 1 equals plus or minus the square root of 5. Now, all I have to do now is solve for x. And the way I solve for x is I add 1 to both sides. So I am left with x equals 1 plus or minus the square root of 5. Always ask yourself, can this be simplified further? This case it can't. Many times it can. So keep in mind that right there. Okay? Now, can I erase this? Are we good? I can erase? Okay. We are going to do the same problem using the quadratic formula. Okay, you can use either one. So now I've got the quadratic formula. So I have negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Okay? So now I'm going to identify my a, b, and c. What's my a value? B value? C value? -4. So, when your B value is negative, be careful. Students make lots of mistakes when your B value is negative. Make sure you're dealing with the negative in the right way. Okay? This is why I put what I'm plugging in blue and the quadratic formula in purple, so that you can make sure you're dealing with that negative value the correct way. Okay? So now I've got negative b. Okay, my b value is negative, so I'm putting that in parentheses. Plus or minus the square root of b squared. My b value is negative 2, so all of that's going to be squared. Minus 4ac. Okay, and all of that is over 2a. Okay. What is negative? Negative 2. Positive 2. Okay, that's one of the mistakes that students make when b is negative. Okay, then I have plus or minus. This is the next one. What is negative 2 squared? Positive 4. If you're going to make a mistake, that's where it is, right there. It's squaring that negative number. A negative number squared is positive. Okay? Negative 4 times 1 times negative 4. I think it's positive 16. Is that good? Okay, yeah. Okay. Now, 2 plus or minus the square root of 20 over 2. Most students decide to stop right there, but you've got to look at this square root of 20. Okay, is there a perfect square in the square root of 20? What is it? It's 4, so we're going to factor it down to 5 and 4. So I have 2 plus or minus the square root of 4 times 5. Okay? So I have 2 plus or minus 2 on the square root of 5 over 2. Okay, now let's think back to the beginning of the semester. If I had 2 plus 2x over 2, okay, who does this belong to? Just the 2, just the 2x, or both of them? Both of them. Both of them. Okay? So you would actually you would think about it as 2 over 2 and 2x over 2. Okay? That's where students make mistakes. So, you have to look at this number, and this number. If something goes into all of them, you simplify. It may be easier for you to think of it this way, and that's completely fine. Okay? If you need to think of it this way. Okay? What does 2 over 2 become? 1. Okay, so my final answer here is 1 plus or minus the square root of 5. Don't forget that 2 over 2 is 1. Some students will mark that out and just say it's 0, but 2 over 2 is 1.
So what if we just put plus or minus square root of 5?
If you only put plus or minus the square root of 5, it would be incorrect. You would get a ton of points because you got it right until that point.
Okay.
But you would miss probably a point or two, depending on how many points the problems were. Okay? Can I go to the next screen? Okay. Now, here I've got 2x squared plus 4x minus 3. I would immediately go to the quadratic formula for this one. Okay? And the reason is my a value is not 1. When my a value is not 1 and I have to complete the square, I have to divide everything by my a value to get my a value 1. And when I do that, I end up with fractions. And none of us love fractions. Okay? So I am going to use the quadratic formula. What is my a value here? B value, C value. -3. Okay? So I have negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac over 2a. Okay? Okay. So now I'm going to start simplifying. So I have -4 plus or minus the square root. 4 squared is 16. Minus 4 times 2 times -4. Minus 4 times 2 is what? -8. -8 times -3 is? Good. 2 times 2 is? Good. So I have -4 plus or minus the square root of 40 over 4. Now, you cannot cancel the 40 and the 4. When something's inside the square root and something's outside the square root, you can't cancel that. Okay? I've got to simplify the square root of 40 first. There is a perfect square in square root of 40. What is it? It is 4. Okay? And sometimes you think, well, if the number like 40, it should be higher. But, you know, the next one would be 9, and 9 doesn't go into 40. Okay? What's the square root of 4? 2. Okay, so let's go up here. Okay. So I have -4 plus or minus 2 on the square root of 10 over 4. Now, we are looking at these numbers right here. These are the numbers that I'm looking at. What number goes into all of those? 2 does. Okay? So 2 goes into -4. We're left with -2. 2 goes into 2 how many times? 2 goes into 4. Okay? So my answer here is -2 plus or minus the square root of 10 over 2. Now, another option, if this helps you, you can do it this way. You can think about -4 over 4 plus or minus 2 on the square root of 10 over 4. Okay? You can think about that 4 in the denominator like you're distributing it. You're giving it to the -4 and you're giving it to the 2 on the square root of 10. What is -4 over 2? -4 over 4. It's -1. Here I've got 2 and 4. That's like the fraction 2/4. What does the fraction 2/4 simplify to? 1/2. Okay, so that would be the square root of 10 over 2. Okay? This is an acceptable answer, and this is an acceptable answer. Both of those are acceptable. Okay? Okay.